When will you get a real job? The words hit me like a slap across the face at Christmas dinner, spoken by my own mother in front of our entire extended family. I'm Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, and for 3 years I had been building what would become the fastest-growing productivity app in Silicon Valley history. But that December evening, as my family passed around expensive wine and discussed my sister's latest promotion at her law firm, I was just the family failure who played with computers instead of having a real career. What none of them knew was that my app had just crossed 8 million users, and I was exactly 47 days away from an announcement that would change everything. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who should support you most, if you've ever had your dreams called childish while watching others get handed opportunities, hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever smiled through family humiliation while secretly building something extraordinary? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The Mitchell family hierarchy had been established since childhood. My younger sister Emma was the golden child, Harvard Law, Supreme Court clerkship, junior partner track at a prestigious firm. Everything she touched turned to gold, and our parents celebrated every milestone with elaborate parties and social media announcements. I was the other daughter, the one they hoped would find her way, eventually. When relatives asked about my career at family gatherings, my father would clear his throat uncomfortably and say, "Sarah is still exploring her options in technology." The word "still" carried the weight of their disappointment. Our childhood bedrooms told the complete story. Emma's walls displayed academic awards, debate trophies, and framed newspaper clippings of her achievements. My room had been converted into my father's home office the moment I graduated college, erasing any evidence that their less successful daughter had ever lived there. Every family photo from the past 5 years was carefully cropped to highlight Emma's accomplishments: her law school graduation, her engagement to another lawyer from a prominent family, her promotion celebrations. I existed in the margins, literally and figuratively, always present, but never the focus. The breaking point came during Emma's engagement party 2 years ago. I had been working 16-hour days on my app, surviving on coffee and determination, when I arrived at the country club celebration. My Aunt Margaret pulled me aside with that patronizing smile I knew too well. "Sarah, dear, don't you think it's time to follow your sister's example? Emma has such a stable future ahead of her. When are you going to stop this computer hobby and get serious about your life?" And before I could respond, my mother appeared and nodded approvingly. "We've been wondering the same thing. You can't live like a college student forever." Standing there in my one good dress, watching my family celebrate Emma's traditional success, while treating my entrepreneurial journey like an embarrassing phase, I made a silent promise. I would build something so undeniably successful that they would never question my choices again. That Christmas morning started like every other Mitchell family gathering, with Emma receiving the spotlight and me being relegated to observer status. The living room buzzed with excitement as Emma unwrapped a Cartier watch from our parents, a congratulations on making junior partner gift that cost more than I spent on rent for 3 months. When my turn came, I received a gift card to Target with a note that read, "For practical necessities." The message was clear. Emma got luxury, I got utility. But the real humiliation came during dinner. Uncle Richard, my father's brother and a successful investment banker, dominated the conversation with questions about Emma's cases and partnership prospects. When the attention briefly shifted to me, the tone changed entirely. "So, Sarah," he said with barely concealed skepticism, "still working on that app thing?" Before I could respond, my mother jumped in with her prepared explanation. "Sarah's been developing some kind of productivity tool for the past few years. We keep hoping she'll realize it's time for something more stable." The way she said productivity tool made it sound like I was selling snake oil. The breaking point came when my cousin Michael, fresh out of business school, decided to offer his expertise. "You know, Sarah, most tech startups fail within the first 2 years. The statistics are really discouraging. Have you considered that maybe it's time to cut your losses and find a real job? I could help you update your resume for corporate positions." The condescension in his voice was suffocating, but what destroyed me was watching my parents nod in agreement. My own family was ganging up on me, treating my life's work like a failed science experiment that needed to be abandoned. When my mother delivered the final blow, "When will you get a real job?" in front of everyone, the room fell silent. Emma looked uncomfortable, Uncle Richard smirked, and my parents waited for my response with expressions that suggested they'd been planning this intervention. I felt the familiar burning sensation of tears threatening to surface, the same feeling I'd experienced countless times when my achievements were dismissed or ignored. But this time, something different happened. Instead of defending myself or making excuses, I simply smiled and said, "Soon, very soon, you'll understand exactly what kind of job I have." The cryptic response puzzled everyone, but I couldn't reveal what I knew. 3 weeks earlier, TechCrunch had contacted me about featuring my app, TaskFlow, in their Apps That Are Changing How We Work series. My user base had exploded from 2 million to 8 million in just 4 months, and enterprise clients were paying premium subscriptions at rates that shocked even me. Investment firms were circling, and I'd been quietly fielding acquisition offers that would make our family's comfortable lifestyle look modest. But sitting at that dinner table, watching my family treat me like a charity case who needed career counseling, I decided they would learn the truth in the most public way possible. That night, I returned to my tiny studio apartment, the one my mother constantly reminded me was inappropriate for someone your age, and opened my laptop to check TaskFlow's latest metrics. 3 million users and growing by thousands each hour. The enterprise revenue dashboard showed numbers that would have made Uncle Richard's investment portfolio jealous. As I prepared for sleep on my secondhand mattress, I calculated exactly how long it would take to reach my goal. 47 days until the TechCrunch feature launched, 47 days until the acquisition announcement, 47 days until my family would see their failure on the cover of every major business publication in the country. The next morning brought a flood of messages from family members, each one a variation of the previous night's theme. Emma texted, "Mom's just worried about your future. Maybe consider their advice." My father called to follow up on our conversation, with a list of law firms that might consider hiring me despite my unconventional background. But the message that crystallized my determination came from my mother. "Sweetheart, we love you, but this technology phase has gone on long enough. It's time to be realistic about your limitations." Reading those words, "your limitations," I felt something inside me harden into unbreakable resolve. They would learn about my limitations soon enough. The weeks following Christmas became a blur of strategic planning and explosive growth. While my family continued their concerned phone calls about my unstable lifestyle, TaskFlow was experiencing the kind of viral expansion that Silicon Valley legends are made of. Every morning, I would wake up to user metrics that seemed too good to be true, yet the numbers never lied. 5 million users, then 9 million, then 2 million. Enterprise clients were signing contracts worth 6 figures, and my modest studio apartment had become the headquarters of what was rapidly becoming a tech phenomenon. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Emma spent her days reviewing legal contracts for corporate mergers, I was fielding acquisition offers from the very companies she represented. Google's enterprise division had reached out through intermediaries, Microsoft was scheduling preliminary meetings, and a consortium of investors led by Andreessen Horowitz was preparing what they called a life-changing offer. But I had learned to keep quiet about victories, a survival skill developed from years of having my achievements minimized or ignored by my family. My daily routine became a masterclass in compartmentalization. During family phone calls, I would discuss my app project in the vague, uncertain terms they expected while simultaneously managing a customer service team of 12, overseeing feature development with engineers in 3 countries, and reviewing partnership agreements with Fortune 500 companies. When my mother would ask if I was making any money yet, I would give modest answers while looking at bank statements that showed monthly revenue exceeding what my father earned annually. The contrast between my family's perception and my reality reached surreal proportions. My cousin Michael, the recent MBA graduate who had offered to help me find a real job, sent me LinkedIn articles about career transitions and resume writing tips. Meanwhile, I was preparing for a feature in Harvard Business Review about young entrepreneurs disrupting traditional productivity models. Emma forwarded job postings from her law firm's corporate clients, concerned that I was falling behind my peers, while I was being invited to speak at Stanford's Graduate School of Business about startup scaling strategies. The most challenging part wasn't managing the explosive growth or the increasing media attention. It was maintaining the facade of struggle that my family expected. When they suggested I move back home to save money while figuring things out, I had to decline without revealing that my app's monthly revenue could have paid their mortgage several times over. When they offered to help me find a stable position with benefits, I couldn't explain that I was already providing comprehensive health insurance and equity packages to my growing team of employees. TaskFlow's success created a strange double life. By day, I would participate in conference calls with executives from tech giants, review term sheets from venture capital firms, and make decisions that affected millions of users worldwide. By evening, I would endure family dinners where relatives offered unsolicited advice about growing up and accepting reality. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, but it also fueled my determination to orchestrate the most spectacular revelation possible. As the TechCrunch feature date approached, I began laying the groundwork for maximum impact. I accepted an invitation to speak at the National Productivity Conference, knowing that several family friends and corporate management would be attending. I scheduled the announcement of our Series A funding round for the same week as Emma's law firm's annual gala, ensuring that business journalists would be covering both events. Every piece was falling into place for a revelation that would reframe not just my career, but my entire family's understanding of who I was and what I had built while they weren't paying attention. The final touch came when TaskFlow hit 8 million users, just days before the public announcement. I allowed myself one moment of private celebration in my studio apartment, looking around at the space my mother had called inappropriate and my father had dismissed as temporary. This modest room had been the launchpad for a revolution, and soon everyone would know it. The week before the TechCrunch feature was scheduled to publish, my family's concern about my situation reached a fever pitch. Emma called every other day with job leads from her legal network. My mother scheduled what she called a serious conversation about my future, and my father began forwarding articles about people who had successfully transitioned from creative fields into more traditional careers. They were circling like well-meaning vultures, preparing for what they assumed would be my inevitable admission of defeat. The turning point came when my mother arranged a dinner with Marcus Webb, the senior partner at Emma's law firm and a longtime family friend. "Marcus has agreed to interview you for a position in their tech consulting division," she announced proudly during our weekly phone call. "It's perfect. You can use your computer background in a real business setting." The condescension was breathtaking. They were offering me an entry-level position consulting about technology at a law firm, while I was running a platform that processed more daily transactions than most Fortune 500 companies. But I accepted the dinner invitation with enthusiasm that surprised even my mother. "That sounds wonderful," I told her, knowing that Marcus Webb would soon be reading about my company in every major business publication. "I'd love to discuss how technology is changing the business landscape." My mother's relief was palpable. Finally, her stubborn daughter was seeing reason and accepting help from successful adults who understood how the real world worked. The dinner was scheduled for the same evening that TechCrunch would be finalizing their feature story. As I prepared for what my family viewed as a job interview, and I knew would be the most awkward conversation of Marcus Webb's career, TaskFlow crossed 9 million users. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. My enterprise client list now included companies that Marcus's firm represented, and my revenue projections for the next quarter exceeded the annual profits of most mid-sized law practices. Emma called the morning of the dinner to offer coaching advice. "Remember, you need to emphasize your willingness to learn and your appreciation for stable structures," she counseled earnestly. "Don't mention the app too much. Focus on how grateful you are for the opportunity to work in a professional environment." Her genuine concern for my success in what she saw as my first real job interview was both touching and absurd. I was preparing to sit across from a man who would soon be learning about my company through major media coverage, while my sister coached me on entry-level interview techniques. The irony deepened when my mother sent me money for a new interview outfit. "First impressions matter in the corporate world," she explained, transferring $200 that represented a fraction of what TaskFlow earned in hourly revenue. I used the money to buy a conservative business suit, knowing that the next time they saw me in professional attire, it would be in photographs, accompanying articles about my company's valuation and growth trajectory. As the hours counted down to both the dinner and the TechCrunch publication, I received a call from my contact at Microsoft. They wanted to expedite their acquisition discussions and were prepared to make what they called an unprecedented offer for a bootstrapped startup. I scheduled the meeting for the week following my family's revelation, knowing that by then, everything would have changed. The girl they were trying to save from her delusions would have become the entrepreneur they never imagined she could be. The final preparation came in the form of a family group text, where Emma shared her excitement about my new direction, and my parents expressed their relief that I was finally ready to join the real world. Uncle Richard even chimed in with advice about corporate culture and professional networking. Reading their well-intentioned messages while reviewing TaskFlow's daily user acquisition reports now approaching 10 million, I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. Their love for me was genuine, but their inability to see my actual capabilities had created a chasm that was about to be bridged in the most dramatic way possible. The dinner at Chez Laurent began exactly as my family had orchestrated. Marcus Webb, distinguished in his expensive suit and emanating the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most successful person in any room, greeted me with the patronizing kindness reserved for charity cases. "Sarah, your mother tells me you've been exploring technology. That's wonderful. We're always looking for people who can help our corporate clients understand digital trends." His tone suggested he was doing my family an enormous favor by considering their wayward daughter for employment. As we settled into our seats at the upscale restaurant my parents had chosen to impress Marcus, I checked my phone discreetly. TaskFlow had just crossed 95 million users, and my assistant had confirmed that TechCrunch's feature would go live within the hour. Everything was converging perfectly. Marcus launched into his prepared speech about the opportunities in legal tech consulting, explaining how my hobby could be channeled into helping real businesses navigate regulatory compliance in the digital age. The position would start at the junior level, of course, Marcus continued, cutting his steak with the precision of someone who made important decisions daily. But with dedication and the right mentorship, you could develop into a valuable member of our corporate advisory team. My parents beamed with pride from across the table, convinced they were witnessing my rescue from a life of uncertainty. Emma nodded encouragingly, probably already planning to help me shop for professional wardrobes suitable for my new corporate identity. The conversation took an interesting turn when Marcus began discussing his firm's recent work with tech companies. "We're representing several startups in acquisition negotiations," he mentioned casually. "The valuations these days are astronomical. Companies with just a few million users are selling for hundreds of millions. It's madness, really. Most of these entrepreneurs have no idea how to build sustainable businesses." I nodded politely while mentally noting that TaskFlow's user engagement metrics would make most of his clients envious. Then my phone buzzed with the notification I'd been waiting for. TechCrunch had published their feature, TaskFlow hits 10 million users, the bootstrap success story that's reshaping productivity software. Within seconds, my LinkedIn notifications exploded with connection requests and congratulatory messages. I glanced at the headline, confirmed the article was live, and smiled at Marcus. "Speaking of tech companies and valuations," I said casually, "what would you say about a productivity app that just hit 10 million users?" Marcus chuckled condescendingly. "Those numbers are usually inflated for marketing purposes. But hypothetically, if the engagement metrics were genuine, we'd be talking about a company worth several hundred million, possibly approaching unicorn status depending on revenue models and growth trajectory." He took a sip of wine, clearly enjoying his role as the expert explaining business realities to the naive amateur. "Why do you ask? Another one of your app ideas?" I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, showing the TechCrunch article with my photograph prominently displayed next to the headline. "Not an idea, Marcus. My company, TaskFlow, just crossed 10 million users an hour ago, and according to the article, Microsoft and Google are both preparing acquisition offers." The color drained from his face as he read the headline, then looked at my photo, then back at the headline, his brain struggling to process the disconnect between his assumptions and reality. My mother grabbed the phone with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the article that described her unemployed daughter as the visionary entrepreneur behind 2024's most successful bootstrap startup. My father read over her shoulder, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. Emma, always the quickest to adapt, was already pulling up additional coverage on her own phone, finding articles in Forbes, Business Insider, and the Wall Street Journal that painted the same picture of extraordinary success. The silence stretched until Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "This is your company? You're the Sarah Mitchell mentioned in all these articles?" When I nodded, he continued reading, his face growing paler with each paragraph that detailed TaskFlow's revenue growth, enterprise client acquisitions, and projected valuation. "According to this, your monthly recurring revenue is," he paused, calculating, "more than most of our firm's annual profits." "That's correct," I replied calmly, watching my family's faces as the magnitude of their miscalculation became clear. "The junior consulting position you offered would represent about a 95% pay cut from my current situation." Marcus loosened his tie, looking like a man who had just offered to teach swimming lessons to an Olympic gold medalist. My parents sat frozen, still processing the revelation that their failure daughter had built something more successful than anything anyone in our family had ever achieved. The final moment came when my father, always focused on practical matters, asked the question that crystallized everything. "Sarah, when you asked us about startup funding 3 years ago, and we said it was too risky." I finished his sentence gently but firmly. "I built it anyway, Dad. Without your investment, without your support, without your belief. I built a $300 million company while you were all worried about when I'd get a real job." The aftermath of that dinner unfolded like ripples across my entire family dynamic. Marcus Webb, who had arrived prepared to offer me charity employment, spent the remainder of the evening asking detailed questions about TaskFlow's technology stack and business model, clearly hoping to position his firm for any legal work my rapidly expanding company might require. My parents sat in stunned silence, occasionally glancing at their phones as notifications flooded in from friends and relatives who had seen the news coverage. The drive home was the first time in my adult life that my family was speechless around me. Emma finally broke the silence. "Sarah, I had no idea. The revenue numbers in those articles. You've built something extraordinary." My mother, still clutching printouts of the news stories, whispered, "We were so wrong about everything. All those times we worried about your future, you were building this." My father, ever practical, asked quietly, "What can we do to support you now?" Their questions revealed the depth of their misunderstanding. They had been so focused on traditional markers of success, steady paychecks, corporate titles, conventional career paths, that they had completely missed the creation of genuine value and innovation happening right under their noses. For 3 years, while they had been planning interventions and job search strategies, I had been solving real problems for millions of people and building sustainable competitive advantages in a massive market. The weeks following the revelation brought a cascade of changes that transformed not just my relationship with my family, but their understanding of success itself. Uncle Richard, who had smugly offered career advice at Christmas, called to apologetically ask if I might consider investing in his hedge fund. Cousin Michael, fresh from his MBA program, reached out on LinkedIn requesting mentorship advice. The same relatives who had treated me like a cautionary tale were now analyzing my company's strategies and sharing my success stories with their professional networks. But the most meaningful transformation was in my daily interactions with my parents and Emma. My mother, who had worried about my unstable lifestyle, began asking genuine questions about entrepreneurship and innovation. My father, whose concerns had always centered on financial security, spent hours learning about venture capital, equity structures, and technology valuations. Emma, brilliant as always, quickly grasped the implications of what I had built and became one of my most trusted advisors on legal and strategic matters. The conversation that brought everything full circle happened 3 months after the TechCrunch feature, during a family dinner at the same restaurant where everything had changed. This time, however, the dynamic was completely different. Marcus Webb had recommended our table, hoping to maintain his connection to what the business press was now calling one of the most successful bootstrap startups in Silicon Valley history. My parents arrived not with concern about my future, but with pride in achievements they were finally able to understand and appreciate. "I keep thinking about all the times we worried about you," my mother said as we reviewed the dessert menu. "We thought we were protecting you from disappointment, but we were actually protecting ourselves from believing that something this extraordinary was possible." My father nodded thoughtfully. "We measured your success against our own experiences, but you were creating something entirely new. We couldn't see it because we'd never seen anything like it before." Emma, who had become TaskFlow's legal counsel and one of my closest collaborators, raised her glass for a toast. "To Sarah, who proved that real jobs aren't found, they're created." As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of completion. The validation I had sought wasn't ultimately about proving my family wrong, but about proving that their love and my success could coexist without requiring me to diminish my ambitions or conform to their expectations. The final piece of closure came when my mother asked the question that bookended our entire journey. "So Sarah, when someone asks what you do for a living now, how do you answer?" I smiled, remembering her Christmas dinner question that had started everything. "I tell them I have a real job, Mom. I built it myself." The laughter that followed contained no traces of condescension or doubt. Just genuine joy in a family that had finally learned to see each other clearly. As TaskFlow continues growing toward our goal of 50 million users and potential acquisition offers that would make me one of the youngest self-made entrepreneurs in tech history, I often reflect on the gift my family's doubt inadvertently gave me. Their inability to envision my success forced me to build something so undeniably extraordinary that it transformed not just my career, but their entire understanding of what's possible when someone refuses to accept limitations imposed by others. Have you ever been asked when you'll get a real job while building something extraordinary? Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the beginning? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this journey resonated with you. Sometimes the most powerful validation comes not from proving others wrong, but from proving to yourself that their limitations never defined your potential.